Today on TIME100 Talks, we'll be focusing on how to engineer a better world, how we can improve the online communities that are shaping our lives, our democracies, and our mental health. We'll be joined in these conversations by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, who developed today's program in partnership with Time. Our guests include 776 founder and Reddit co-founder Alexis Ohanian. Author and academic Safiya U will be joined by Center for Humane Technology co-founder Tristan Harris. Author, founder, and president of the Loveland Foundation, Rachel Cargle. And Rappler CEO and executive editor Maria Ressa will be joined by disinformation researcher Renée DiResta. Plus, we're highlighting the founder and CEO of Somewhere Good, Naj Austin, and the hosts of the Teenager Therapy podcast. Today is October 20th, 2020. This is TIME100 Talks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to TIME100 Talks, our weekly program where we bring together extraordinary leaders to spotlight solutions and encourage progress toward a better world. I'm Edward Felsenthal, editor-in-chief and CEO of Time. Our focus today is the state of the digital world. If your home is anything like mine, screen time has skyrocketed during the pandemic. Remote work, remote school, relentless news alerts, isolation from friends and loved ones, all of it has made us more glued than ever to our devices. The boundaries between our physical and online lives have never been more blurred. What does this mean for the health of the world, for our emotional, physical, and mental well-being, for our trust in the information we consume, for the way we treat one another? These are questions that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been deeply focused on in their work, and we're so pleased to have partnered with them to develop today's special edition of TIME100 Talks. And I'm delighted now to welcome the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to TIME100 Talks. Thanks so much to you both for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Edward. Very nice to see you.
This is great. Thank you.
I'd like to start really just by asking how you've been doing during the pandemic. You're doing so much work for others, but of course it's so important that we all check in with each other during this crazy and challenging time in the world. How are you? How are you coping with this strange moment?
Yes, thank you for asking. You know, I think all things considered, everyone is grappling with a different version of the same thing. And for us, we are just trying to embrace all of the quality time we get with our son right now and to not miss a single moment of his growth and development, which has been really special.
Yeah, I think when people ask how are you, I sense it from you. It's a case of really how are you, because we before this year, I think everyone sort of throws that term around and everyone's satisfied with it. Yeah, I'm good, I'm fine, thanks, and then it's moving on to something else. But I think you're quite right. It's this year more so than ever. It really is a question of no. How are you? And in answer to that, we're good. There's a lot of stuff to be focused on, a lot of work. But as Meghan quite rightly said, this is an opportunity to spend more time as a family than we probably would otherwise.
As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you've both been deeply focused on working toward making online communities kinder and safer. How do you decide where to spend and devote your time? There's so many urgent needs in the world, of course, right now. How do you prioritize? How do you think about where you can make a difference?
I mean, I think for both of us, individually and also as a couple, our commitment to the causes that we have really worked towards for a long time, well before even knowing each other, are unwavering. And it was only in the past couple of years that we both started to connect the dots of all of the work that I was doing on women's empowerment or young girls and their sense of self and self-worth, and seeing what the online spaces were doing to that community. And equally, I think, obviously my husband has worked quite a bit in the space of mental health, but also the environment, which you can touch on.
Yeah, I think that the mental health aspect is the most obvious to people. I think that's very much been a topic of conversation across a lot of the platforms, but also in the media as well. And let's not forget that these places are a refuge for some people, but it is it can be a sort of a love-hate relationship. But certainly, for the things that I'm passionate about, especially for the environment that I've been involved in it with now for 12, 15 years, for me, what I see is the digital space hampering the progress that needs to be made. and this misinformation that seems to snowball from one place that is in the online space, even, and then ending up in our physical world. And a lot of the time we don't know where it comes from. We don't know how to trace it back. So
yeah, I think to that point, both of us realized, well, hold on a second. We can continue to champion these things that we're passionate about. We can continue to do this work to try to affect change and help the people that need it most, or the communities or environments that need it most. But it's almost like you're taking 2 steps forward and 5 steps backwards if you can't get to the root cause of the problem, which at this point right now we see in a large way as a lot of what's happening in the tech space. So we've been on a journey to learn as much as we can since really January this year, and are happy and privileged to be able to do this with you, to bring to you some of the people that we've been learning from, and to share that with your viewers and your readers.
Harry, you mentioned the media, the role of the media, and I wanted to ask, how do you see the media's role in this conversation about online community, pro and con? And connected to that, why was it important for you to partner with us on this topic?
Yeah, I think it's. I think the media's role is absolutely vital, not just in this, but in everything that's going on in the world. Always has been, always will be. I think there's a huge amount of trust that we all put into media and digital platforms. That sometimes is undermined. But I think the main reason for us to want to partner with Time is trust, is truth, and I think now more than ever there is this overwhelming desire for everybody out there for truth, because there is so much information being thrown around from one side to the other, and to remain so neutral in as much as truth is neutral, I think is a really obvious choice for us to partner with you guys, and the impact that you're making and the stories that you're sharing is really moving the needle.
Well, we're very glad to be working with you, and particularly on this topic. You've brought together a remarkable, brilliant group of leaders and thinkers for this program, starting with Alexis Ohanian, who you'll be speaking with, I know, in a moment, Meghan. But why did you gather this group? What if you could just talk a little about the varied perspectives you've brought in for these conversations, and what you see as the connective tissue in the program?
I mean, I think for both of us, when we started dipping our toes into this, it can feel really overwhelming to try to understand all of the nuance of what happens online. It is all-encompassing, and it affects us at a multifaceted level. And so we started with professors and experts in the field, with defectors from some of the largest platforms, neurologists, people to really help us view it through a holistic approach. And in that, there have been relationships and now friendships that we've formed with a lot of these people who have a shared goal of wanting to make the space healthier and better for all of us. But, from Tristan Harris, who was one of the first people we convened at an event at Stanford, January or February of this year. And just really so knowledgeable on not just what the problems are online, but trying to find solutions for it, which is important to us. Safiya U, who now has become a friend as well, who wrote an incredible book called Algorithms of Oppression, to really help us see what is happening that we don't have a choice in, just by doing a simple search online.
I think for me, Edward, there's a huge part of this is when you're driving a car and all the warning lights are going off and there's smoke pouring out of the hood. You're not going to keep on driving. You're going to pull over. Now, in the olden days, you could probably pop the hood, have a look under it, and maybe perhaps fix it, or at least have a rough idea about what's going on. But now, every single one of these new cars has a shield over the top of it, and it means you can't actually fix it if you want to fix it. You've got to call the experts in, and we're not experts in this field by no stretch of the imagination. So for us to be able to convene the experts and say, this doesn't feel right, and you guys know that it's not right, how can we explain this to people? How can we make people more aware of the problems? Because, from a branding perspective on the outside, it all looks great. But what our job is, especially throughout these conversations, is to get people to listen to the experts and for them to explain how what is happening in the online world is affecting the world.
Yes.
It is not restricted to certain platforms or certain social media conversations or groups. This is a global crisis of hate, a global crisis of misinformation, and a global health crisis, of one of which, again, these people that we're about to speak to, there is no one else better to be able to explain it, because it is a very confusing issue.
Yeah, and what's been great as well is to put them in the same room with each other. And many of them know each other, but also for a lot of them, they hadn't connected. And to really look at it, this isn't just a tech problem. This isn't solely a mental health or emotional well-being problem. This is a human problem.
It affects every single one.
And what's happening to all of us online is affecting us deeply offline. So these are the people that we feel will help find the solutions that we all need.
And on that note, thank you again for being part of today's program and conversations.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. It's really, it's an honor to be able to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Edward.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex will be with us throughout the program today to guide these important discussions. Before we begin, though, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, P&G, for making today's Time 100 Talks possible. Now let's kick things off with our first interview of today's program, Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, in conversation with 776 founder and Reddit co-founder Alexis Ohanian.
Hi, everyone. I am here with my friend, Alexis Ohanian, co-founder of Reddit, an investor, and also a founder of VC Fund 776. Alexis, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Megan.
Feels very official, different from our normal chats. I'm glad that you're here, and what we're talking about today is obviously so important and something that you are so knowledgeable in, obviously, as a founder with Reddit. But I think, if you don't mind, we can jump right into it, because it made a lot of news and garnered attention when you decided to step back from your board seat at Reddit and instead to ask that they give that seat to a person of color, and specifically someone who is Black. And I think, that resonated with people in a huge way, especially because you said you were doing it because you were inspired by your daughter, Olympia. Can you tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that and what it's been since you made that choice?
Yeah, well, I just remarked recently on Twitter that given that I am still getting hate mail about it, I knew I made the right choice. Because sadly, we're at a place in this country where there is still a lot of work to be done, And when I looked at positions that I occupied, especially one, Reddit is a multi-billion-dollar company, has a lot of influence on the world, especially in the United States. And I thought about the role that it plays and the role that all social media companies play in our society and the world that it's shaping for everyone, including, people like my daughter, like my wife. I knew that I had a responsibility to be able to answer her when she asked me in 10 years, when she's a snarky teenager, what I did to help be a part of making things better for her. And I'm happy to see that since, that resignation protest, Reddit started making a lot of changes to improve the content, banning a ton of communities really built around hate, and starting to enforce more seriously a lot of these policies. I know there's a lot more work to be done, and I hope that this is really a first step for me to try to just be more deliberate in the work that I'm doing, and frankly, more effective in the work that I'm doing to create a better future for my daughter and lots of other people who look like her. Because frankly, it's going to mean a better outcome for all of us.
Yeah.
And so I actually have kind of selfish motivations for that too. Companies are going to be more successful the more diversity they have, because that means a broader range of ideas. We're seeing more and more studies that show just how healthy that is for boardroom conversations all the way down to the most junior employees, to have those diversities of thought and experience. And frankly, this is long overdue. And I've been heartened when I have seen other people in similar positions who have stepped down to create opportunities for people of color. I still, don't have to look too hard to see there's a lot more work to be done. And, I'm happy to sign myself up for that, because I owe it to a lot of people, and I'm ready for the challenge.
Well, one of the things that you had said, actually on the heels of a piece that my husband had written for Fast Company, you wrote "Leaders Lead," and I think that's what you're doing. Thank you for saying that about the work that he's doing. This is something obviously we're both really passionate about, but that's what you're doing. You are leading by example, and I think, I'm sorry to hear that you're still receiving hate mail. I know we have shared experiences in being in interracial marriages and, raising small children who are of mixed race and how that plays into that. But I think, to touch on what you were saying earlier, what do you think that we're losing in a broader sense when we don't have that level of representation, not just in the companies themselves, but in what the content is and how it's being shared? I mean, you touched on it there about the diversity, not just of color, but the diversity of thought. All of that is so key. And I think perhaps you can address for people the damage that it actually does in the absence of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're having quite a year in 2020. And I think this has absolutely been a year of reflection. And it's one that I think will continue for many years to come. And in particular, if we look at the platforms, and specifically in technology and in social media, that have shaped so much of how we live, how we work, how we play, how we get informed, everything. You look at all of us who created those platforms, and there is a common thread among all of us. We all look the same. We all had very similar education experiences and backgrounds. And the way that has now played out and manifested 15 years later is the culmination of, frankly, a lot of blind spots. And I say this, knowing that there's a generation of CEOs who I meet now who are sort of the version of me, but, 15 years later, fresh out of college, starting something that they know one day will be, or really truly believe will be a world-changing type company, who have so much more perspective than I did. Who it goes without saying, more often than not also don't look like me. But even if they do, have much more perspective on it. And what they're realizing is, when we talk about culture within an organization, people and culture, I think a lot of people originally thought of as just being like a rebrand of HR, human resources. But what we are now seeing crystal clearly is that smart investments in people and culture early. And that means thinking deliberately and intentionally about the values you want to create at a firm, thinking about the way you want to do hiring, the way you want to do onboarding, the kinds of environments you want to create for employees to feel welcome and feel included and feel a sense of belonging. Those pay huge dividends over 5, 10, 15 years when you get them right, because it means your retention is higher. It means it's easier to bring on and recruit top talent. And it means that you have more voices in the room when you're making even simple product decisions, because you have different perspectives. You have someone who can actually say and is empowered to say, or ideally is in a position of power to say, we need to build this differently because this just won't work for me or people who look like me because of some unintended consequence that well-intentioned people just won't see. And I'm excited because, like I said, at the end of the day, there is a strong capitalist reason to want this, aside from the obvious societal one. And as more and more companies realize that and are able to show that this is not just the right thing to do from a societal standpoint, but the right thing to do from a business standpoint, I think it really starts to get momentum. And it's important. This work, we're seeing the implications, or we're seeing the results of not doing it, and we can't get started soon enough.
Well, and I think also, as you remember, Harry and I just convened a small gathering just a month or so ago, and you weren't able to make it, unfortunately, but in your absence, you recommended someone to come in your place. That I think was so beneficial for us to have that added perspective from John, because what he was able to share is in conjunction with, as you put it, it's almost like, if I knew then what I know now, how differently would Reddit look now if you had this sort of knowledge? And in knowing that, what you are trying to create right now, which I think is just so impressive and necessary, is speaking to all the things that you have from this learned experience, having seen what's happened through Reddit and other platforms. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, and John is the CEO of a company I invested in called Centropy. He took all of his experience building machine learning, so artificial intelligence, to basically teach robots how to read. And he used this to build a business he sold to Apple. He could have spent his remaining years just living a great, comfortable life there. But instead, he wanted to start a company to make social media safer for his children and for everyone's children. And we reached a breakthrough in the last couple of years where technology is now actually capable of reading and understanding language in a way that it never could before. And so in the past, if you wanted to ban a racial epithet, you could by uploading, a list of 500 ways to type that word. And you'd do an okay job, but inevitably bad actors would find ways to
slip through
yeah. And we still see examples of this to this day where, in the wake of Ahmaud Arbery being murdered, communities were using the word jogger as a racial epithet for the N-word. And without a lot of humans staying on top of it in community management, it's impossible to really try to keep tabs on. Now, thanks to this kind of technology, it can be detected in real time. When I look back at 15 years of building a platform like Reddit and all of our social media peers, and I look forward to the new sort of what's to come, investing in those types of tools, those trust and safety type of tools, is something that all of us, as an industry sort of put off, because what was most important was growth, and not far behind that was in revenue. And what we are realizing now is those two really important things are actually very much tied to the toxicity of our platforms. People actually do churn out once they have enough bad experiences. There's actually a business reason to intervene when those harassment situations happen, when that toxicity starts to build up. And now that we're finally connecting the dots as an industry, I think we'll start to see more change, but it hasn't happened fast enough. And frankly, it's sad on the one hand that it's had to become a business decision, but the fact that it is now sort of tied to the key drivers of the business, it means that it can't be undone. We now have to think of the trust and safety of our users just as importantly as we think about growth and just as importantly as we think about revenue.
Well, and also the trust and safety of the employees, right? Because I think building the technology that can help cite those things and help safeguard everyone is key. You think about moderators and what they're exposed to and the psychological offshoring that happens for so many people. I was just reading about an employee of YouTube who has just filed a lawsuit for the post-traumatic stress they're experiencing because of the types of vitriol they have to read through without any emotional well-being support to go home with. Can you imagine carrying that every day? So it's everyone that ends up being affected by it because someone has to tease through it, unless, as you say, what Centropy's doing, being able to find the technology that can help keep all of us safe in that.
That is right. And it is a toll that we are only starting to recognize. And you're right. A lot of companies in the past have literally offshored this to other countries. And some of that work is being done by Americans, but regardless, it's being done by human beings who, you're right, pay the mental and emotional toll of looking at awful content day in and day out. And the only, I'll say the one silver lining on this is the number of reasonable, decent people far exceeds the vitriolic, awful people. I if anything, I still do have more hope than ever in decent, good people. In spite of everything else, I still do believe that. And so part of this is about building the technology and building the tools to make sure that small, vitriolic, awful group does not have a platform to spread their beliefs and spread that kind of hate.
You're right. The good outweighs the bad, but my goodness, the bad can be so loud. The damage that happens as a result of that is just, I think you've talked about, and you tweeted it recently, that we haven't yet begun to realize the legacy and the effect that all of these platforms and what social media and what the online space is doing to all of us on a deeper level. And that's what I think people haven't realized. We're in it now, but we have a chance to get ourselves out of it.
Mm-hmm. I was a history major at UVA, and I studied post-World War II, sort of post-war Germany, the denazification process, basically, that both West and East Germany went through. And I never thought it would serve me now 15 years later, but in a way it is, because I do think there's going to be some work that will need to be done to de-radicalize a generation, especially here in the United States, who, predominantly white, predominantly male, feeling very disaffected and sort of left behind and frustrated by a lot of things, and who found solace, who found community, who found kinship in dark corners that normalized really socially toxic behavior, whether it was racism or misogyny. I mean, you can sadly see this, and I think historians will have the receipts. They'll be able to see this sort of paper trail, and I think more and more of these stories are starting to surface, and more manifestos will be published, and we'll get a sort of much more raw and real and tragic glimpse into this. But I think that is going to be a lot of the important work of the next decade or so, to try to find ways not just to curb the abuse going forward, but also to sort of reintegrate folks who, have used these platforms to find community around some of the most vile things. And it is the gift and the curse of this technology, because we can now commune online in a way that it is really as real as offline. I think for a long time, people were very skeptical that you could build a relationship with a stranger on the internet about your love of Pokemon that's just as real as your best friend at the office, who you see every day or used to see every day. But the reality is, I think we all have examples now, and it's pretty statistically significant, of people who have built very close relationships and friendships with people they don't even know offline.
Yes. Sometimes even closer than the ones they have in real life.
Precisely. And so if we can accept that, and we understand that, and we believe that, then it is not a leap to consider the effect of what this does for recruiting, what this does for those really abhorrent, awful sort of ideologies and communities that can be formed. Because it's a great thing, and we should celebrate it when you find someone else who loves Pokemon as much as you do. That's great. Like, and and there are plenty of things that are either as benign as Pokemon or as wonderful as, being in a community where being out is a problem, and finding an LGBT community online that you can speak to truthfully and candidly and openly. And so there's that spectrum. But those online relationships are just as real when they are negative. And what starts even almost sometimes gets waved off as being just a joke, or, oh, that's just offensive humor, is a way to actually normalize really problematic behavior. And I think that's going to be the really difficult accounting that we'll have to have in the next 10 years, where we figure out how to bring a lot of those folks back, to de-radicalize. Because these are, we talk a lot about the propaganda and the misinformation, but this is the beer hall, and it's not, 80, 90, in the 30s, that beer hall was somewhere that you could go on a Tuesday night to sort of, build that community and create that toxicity. But today, that beer hall is on our smartphone, and we can visit it anytime we want to. We can be right back into that community setting and that sort of normalization anytime.
Well, and I think to your point as well that, I was reading this piece in the Wall Street Journal, I'm sure you saw it was months and months ago, but one of the statistics that they shared was on Facebook. 64% of people who are joining extremist groups are joining it because it's recommended to them. So when you think about your own user experience of going online, and your experience is being shaped by something that is pushing you in the direction that you may have not even been looking, but you're vulnerable, or you're bored, or you're craving community, whatever it is, that one thing then opens this gateway to so many other things that takes you down a path that you weren't even intending to go. But as you're saying, the adverse effect of that is tremendous. And I think, for us to be able to really, we were talking about this earlier, harness, how do we now reframe this space for good? How do we use all of the positive stuff that is part of the online space and try to create community that is really focusing on that and empowering people in that vein, as opposed to this vitriol that we're seeing. And I think just, as we sort of wrap up, one of the things that I would ask you is, a lot of the sort of washing of the hands that comes up and the lack of accountability is from the space of, well, what really is hate speech? Which I don't think that's in question, but that does come up for a lot of people. Or how does a content moderator know if that's just a joke, as you were sort of suggesting some people say, or if that's true? And how you monitor that in a way and to keep everyone who's on those platforms safe and not taken in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well, I'll stretch the beer hall analogy a little further, which is to see I love a good beer. So, if I own a beer hall, I ultimately get to decide what my beer hall policy is. And that beer hall policy can be stricter than the policy of, let's say, the country the beer hall is in. And I can say, actually, no, the kind of environment I want to create at this beer hall is this, that, and the other. And that is the ultimate responsibility of a private business, right? They free speech laws obviously vary country to country. But if we just start with the United States, we have a framework created by the government, which is designed to be sort of among the most free possible. But as a private company, as an owner operator of a beer hall, we actually get to decide, no, buddy, you've had enough to drink. Like, we don't want you to be here, or like, we don't want your group organizing here. This is just not why we built this beer hall. We got a lot of people who patronize this beer hall, and we've just decided you're some of the folks we don't want to serve anymore. That is fully within the rights of a private business. And for too long, it will never suffice to simply say, oh, we're just a platform. Because we know just how much of an impact it has. We know how much it actually informs how much of media is in the name social media. So I don't know how that worked for so long. Like, no, you can't say platform when you're actually calling yourself a social media site. Like, it's in the name. It's media.
And there's responsibility with that. There's responsibility in media. There's responsibility in journalism. You're responsible for what is being pushed out there, just like in broadcast. But somehow the platforms have created a space where they are not subject to that same sort of jurisdiction, and it's troubling. But you're right. I mean, I'd like to be at your beer hall because it sounds like a good, happy, positive place.
And it turns out that beer hall actually would be really, really popular because the vast, vast majority of people don't want that in their beer hall, so to speak. And
that the owners would still make money. That's the thing. And that the business is still successful.
Yes. And in fact, would be more so because people are more engaged. And it's the only other sort of point I'll make sure to make here is it's also worth pointing out, while often it's said, well, look, these communities can still organize elsewhere. And that's true, right? The internet itself is an unregulatable entity. But there is a huge difference that is made when platforms either explicitly or implicitly basically co-sign these communities. And so, and this is something, that I think we'll ultimately be getting more and more scrutiny even at a government level. But there is an impact that it has when you're used to, you're scrolling through a news feed of, oh, cute photo of your nephew. Oh, my uncle just got a promotion. And then, oh, some weird, some racist conspiracy theory. And that normalization, it's different if you've got to go to jankyurl.com to find.
It's a really good point.
That you, as a user, you feel like, I think we far too often separate online, offline. Like, they're actually more similar than we realize. And so it's the difference between opening up that sort of civilized newspaper or watching that sort of typical news station and then seeing, family photos and then craziness. It, in a way,
it conflates
normalizes
it. You're
the
right.
craziness.
You're
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And that has another role to play in it. And it's one where, like I said, I think we'll be spending a lot of time working to undo and fix a lot of this stuff. I'm grateful for the work, obviously, that you and Harry have done, and I know we'll continue to do, because it's just, I don't know. I'll admit, it's on the one hand, it is disappointing to know that so much of this perspective I only really got once I married, well, started dating, but then certainly once I married my wife, and once we had our daughter, it leveled it up to another place where, yeah, I mean, we talked about this often. I've had so many moments in my life where I was given the benefit of the doubt, where I never felt unsafe, where I always felt heard, where like I did not realize until I was in a relationship with someone who has achieved as much as she has and still regularly deals with this in painful, frustrating ways. And as a husband, you just get outraged. And then especially now in the role as a father, I just can't help but want to create a world that is just fair to my daughter. And I know that that's lofty, but it's a thing worth striving toward. And I'm going to work every day to get a little better.
Thank you so much, honestly, and just all of your insight. I think it's going to help a lot of people to better understand why we're all so passionate about this, but mostly just thank you for doing the work and leading the way and finding solutions, not just for all of us, but for your little girl, for our little boy, for all of us. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. We hope you're enjoying today's very special edition of this program in partnership with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, focusing on engineering a better world. Next up, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will be joined by Tristan Harris, president and co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, and a focus of the new film, The Social Dilemma, and by Safiya Noble, author of the important book, Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. They'll discuss solutions. What can big tech do to build more equitable algorithms in a more inclusive digital world?
Hi everybody, we are here with Center for Humane Technology co-founder and president Tristan Harris.
And we are also here with Safiya Noble, author of Algorithms of Oppression and also the co-director of UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. Hi guys.
Hi guys, nice to see you.
Long time no see.
Great to be here with you both.
Yeah, thank you for being here. We have so much to cover.
Yeah, how's things in your lives since we last saw you?
Not bad. There might be a dog barking at some point, so I guess that means all is well over here in our house. How are you, Tristan?
I'm great. I just got back from a huge trip to the Grand Canyon, so I just came back from destroying my legs, but I'm doing all right. It's a welcome break from technology.
Helpful that Zoom is just here then.
Exactly.
Nice. Guys, we'll get straight to it. Tristan, I'm going to come to you first. In The Social Dilemma, a documentary about how social networks are reshaping our society, which has broken records on Netflix, so congratulations with that. You asked the question, how do you wake up from the matrix when you don't know you're in the matrix? So what is the wake-up call?
Yeah, well, in this film, The Social Dilemma, it's really about the way that technology has completely hijacked the way that each of us make sense of the world and make choices. If you just look at the surface area of which technology composes what we're thinking and believing, every time you look at your phone, it schedules a block of thoughts and meaning making that our minds do. Whether that's children who look at their phones to see how many likes that they got, or it's each of us sort of checking in addictively with what's going on in the U.S. elections. These have become the meaning-making machines for each of us, especially in a COVID era where many of us are at home. And what's really the life like on the streets of Portland right now? Is it mass rioting and shootings, or is it actually a really calm day? Well, the way that we would know that is you would look through your social media feeds. And the question is, when that meaning making is distorted by algorithms that don't have our best interests at heart, how do you wake up from a distorted view of reality when you don't know that it's a distorted view of reality?
it's incredible to hear you put it in those terms. And once we had met, what was it, January or February of this year?
Stanford,
Yeah, it really opened our eyes to try to dig a little bit deeper. And one of the things that I started reading was, Safiya, your book, and I think you can touch on this as well. People don't have an understanding of what algorithms are doing in terms of shaping our opinion of things that may not be based on truth and are based on perhaps someone else's opinion that's now being forced in your direction. Can you touch on that a little bit just to help us all understand in the same way that you've helped us understand?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's really imperative that we understand that the technologies are already existing in systems of structural oppression, structural racism, global social, political, and economic inequality. And so the technologies are often picking up and amplifying and deepening those existing systems. So this is one of the things that I think is so important to understand, is that if you are already part of a vulnerable community that has been misrepresented or has been targeted with hate or disinformation, calls for genocide, calls for racist violence against you, misogyny, as Meghan, I know you know so profoundly, the technologies are actually able to, at speed and scale, amplify those kinds of messages and quite indeed those kinds of harms, because the harms don't just live in the platforms. They often extend to shaping behaviors that people also act upon. And so these are one of the reasons why we have to really understand the power and potency of these technologies and whether indeed some of them should even exist.
What are the tech algorithms? What are they incentivized to do for us? And what is the actual price that we're paying for that?
Well, I would say that one of the things that is highly incentivized is, the virality. That means the speed through which kind of some of the worst types of content can flow through platforms. So we know that, for example, racism and sexism are very big business in technology platforms, not just social media, but also the other kinds of search and ad-driven kinds of platforms. So these things are very important to understand. Those things don't necessarily start in Silicon Valley, but I think there's really little regard for when companies are looking at maximizing the bottom line through engagement at all costs, it actually has a disproportionate kind of harm and cost to, again, vulnerable people. And these are things we've been studying for, more than 20 years. And I think they're really important to bring out this kind of profit imperative that really thrives off of harm.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we often ask, how much have you paid for your Facebook account, recently? Near zero, but they're worth more than $725 billion. So how are they worth so much? Well, they monetize something, and it's not just our data. They need our attention. And obviously, because there's only so much attention, just like with the planet, there's only so many resources, and you have an infinite growth economy on a finite amount of the planet's surface area. We have a infinite growth attention economy of profit on a finite amount of human attention at the base. And as Safiya said, the way to get each of us to come back all the time to maximize that time spent in engagement is by promising us that thing that you post could go viral to millions of people. And they're competing to seduce us with that promise of virality. If you go to TikTok today, they'll show you on a list of hashtags you could post against, that if you post a video for hashtag Doritos dance, you'll reach 1 billion people. And that's very enticing to each of us. But of course, that doesn't reward what's true, what's credible, or what's really good for society. And that's really the core problem.
Well, so then how do we end up, and this is what we're all trying to find, is how do we help with the solution? Because how do you monitor, how do you police that? Is it enough, and I think I know your answer to this, for these platforms to be self-policing? Or if not, what is the solution? Where does the accountability fall? And how do we start to see that needle move in the direction of good and positive as opposed to where it seems to be now?
We know that public policy and regulation is absolutely crucial to these conversations about how business is conducted in the United States and abroad. Many governments have to contend with consumer harm, consumer safety around products. That's certainly one way in which it can be framed. We can also look at human rights and civil rights models of intervention that again happen at the level sometimes of governments and often at kind of civic society organizations. So I think it's complex. I don't think that the tech industry can regulate itself. It's a little bit like the fox guarding the hen house. And, so people like me, like longtime critics of big tech are, constituting things like the Real Facebook Oversight Board, ways to draw attention to when tech tries to self-regulate, they actually indeed don't take any action. So I think those are, the solutions are complex. I don't think they just resolve by, individual onus that I have to put down my phone and somehow that will solve it. And I think that's one of the, ways we have to complexify the kinds of solutions that are being proposed, from a variety of different quarters.
To add to what Safiya is saying, I think what's inhumane about today's technology platforms is that if you don't want those harms to make it a personal responsibility for a systemic oppressive issue is what is inhumane. To say that I just shouldn't use Facebook, which by the way, the people in Myanmar who weren't on Facebook, who were part of the Muslim Rohingya minority, who were persecuted, didn't have to be on Facebook for the fake information there that was targeting them to obviously affect their life and death consequences, and so many more examples like that. So these things really affect all of us, which is why we do need systemic accountability. And to add to what Safiya said, I've been trying to work the back room of these tech companies for a long time and build relationships with people at the executive leadership level. But what we find consistently, as much as there's very good intentioned people who want to do the best they can't go against the kind of core DNA of what their system is based on, which is unchecked virality, growth at all costs. They can't really change that core DNA. And that's why we have to have public accountability and ultimately regulation that sets the guardrails.
And Tristan, can you give 2 or 3 other examples, ones that you just touched on there, to go a little bit wider, whether it's into environmental issues, whether it's democracy, things that you know about and things that you've shared with us before?
Other harms, you mean?
Yeah.
So there's a resource in the Center for Humane Technology website called the Ledger of Harms. As Safiya said, this is very complex because when these technologies take over not just how we think, but our politics, our public square, our children's development, how kids are being educated, who's getting elected, these things have systemic consequences across all balance sheets in society. And so we need a really good accounting of where all that goes wrong. And so I think one thing we need is more transparency. The basic table stakes of regulation is we have to know how big are the problems of each of these different areas. And the public, almost like instead of having a board of directors, there should be a board of the people where the public get to say, these are the harms that we care about. And we should be reported to on a quarterly basis about whether those harms are being removed. Because right now they're not. It's too little too late. People from the community that Safiya and I come from are waving our hand and saying there's a huge problem over here, and only after a huge amount of public support is built do we create a whack-a-mole stick and we'll whack that one mole. But for each one of those moles, you get thousands more.
But even then, even once it's removed, that's not the solution, right? Because as we talked about before, what they really need to be doing is going back over all of the stuff that is proved to be false and inform people what you saw a week ago, a few days ago, whatever it was, that was factually incorrect, and this is the truth.
Right, in the same way you get a push notification about anything else to say, this thing that you shared that you believe to be true, actually it wasn't true. So at least, maybe the imprint is already done at that point. Maybe it's already ingrained in you and it's now part of an enabling belief system. But perhaps part of those solutions are giving the truth when you know you have it, giving the facts and correcting mistruths when you know that they've been pushed out. The biggest thing that I think most people probably watching today want to know is, what can they each do? What can you, if you had to do one thing today that is going to change what your user experience is like, that's going to change the environment that you are participating in and the adverse effect that it's having on so many of us, what is one single thing that each of us could begin doing today that would push this in the direction that we are all hoping to see it go?
Well, I think one of the most important things people can do is to vote policies and people that are aware of what's happening and who are able to truly intervene. Because we're born into the systems that we're born into. If you ask my parents what it was like being born before the Civil Rights Act was passed, they had a qualitatively different life experience than I have. So I think part of what we have to do is understand the way that policy truly shapes the environment. I mean, one of the challenges when you talk about why people can't do things like fully disentangle from disinformation on the internet is because so many of the public democratic counterweights, schools, universities, public libraries, public media, I mean, these are the places where the public becomes well educated. And when you have a sector like the tech sector that is so extractive, it doesn't pay taxes, it offshores its profits, it defunds, in fact, the democratic educational counterweights. Those are the places where we really need to intervene. That's where we make systemic long-term change, is to reintroduce funding and resources back into those spaces so that then people aren't just reliant upon Facebook for their news because they have no other choice. And I think those are the kinds of things, voting and really becoming politically engaged and running for office indeed themselves.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many things we just opened up there. I think to add on to what Safiya's saying, one of the goals of the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, which is right in line with what Safiya's saying, was to make sure that there are new leaders in power that actually reflect an understanding of these issues. So in that campaign, it was making sure that there was actually civil rights leadership at the top, C or VP, I think it was C level of the company, of Facebook in this case, but it should be really at the other companies as well, because we need leaders that intrinsically understand these issues. Maybe people have different issues with Andrew Yang, but he was one of the only candidates to propose a department of the attention economy and actually rigorously deal with some of the issues of the attention economy, which no other candidate had kind of spoken to. And so I think we need leaders that reflect many more of those values.
You touched on the attention economy. I know that's a thing you love to talk about, Tristan. But isn't that it? Isn't that the fact that these online platforms are distracting us from the very things that we should be focused on, right? Because we're all plugged in, whether we know it or not. And there was so much progress, and now we have this thing that has connected the whole world in one way or another. How do we harness that connectivity? How do we really make progress, knowing that we have this platform, this global platform, to really affect change for good?
Well, these are big questions. I mean, I think to Safiya's point as well about the way that the tech companies have kind of hollowed out many of the institutions from which we would derive what are the values that are important to us. I mean, publicly funded media, well-funded local newspapers. These are the other entities that have gone bankrupt as a result of the extractive sort of clickbait practices, the way that the big tech giants sort of reformat what it means to be a local newspaper, which is increasingly about that race to the bottom of the brainstem to get those clicks, which also makes them less profitable over time, which also decreases the quality of journalism, which means that we have a less educated citizenry. And so, as you said, Harry, that the real issue here is our sense making. What is actually important to us? What are we paying attention to? That is the thing that we're losing control over. I wanted to add a thing from earlier. You asked what's something that people can do, not to make this about individual responsibility, but we have created a page of things that people can do on our Take Control page of the Center for Humane Technology's website that tries to get at what would it look like to gain back our cognitive sovereignty, the sovereignty of our own minds, and to try to take more collective control about what's really worth our attention, both individually and as a community. Like, what's really important to us? Is it yelling about the latest political football, or is it actually asking, what would it take for us to deal with some of our issues?
Let me just add, if I may, it isn't a fait accompli that everything is terrible in terms of what the internet could provide. I mean, some of us have been on the internet for a really long time. I've been on the internet since the late 80s, and I can tell you, I've witnessed a lot of change over time. We know, for example, that the Black Lives Matter movement was really galvanized in many ways because of social media. So even though we are experiencing harms, we want to remember we still have agency. We still have the ability to use some of these platforms to resist, to meet each other, to make connections. I mean, certainly what the two of you are doing in terms of amplifying voices of people who otherwise might not be heard. There are some really powerful things that I think we want to imagine and take a hold of in the space too, even at the same time. It's not that we can't, that we have to just completely unplug. We just want to be critical, thoughtful, engaged users and able to kind of discern what's happening in this space. That gives people a lot more power than feeling that, it's a fait accompli, that, we're in a space that is void of possibility.
I mean,
I love talking to you guys.
we love talking to you
You
guys.
just lay it out so in a way that anyone anywhere can understand it, because a large part of this from my perspective is that it is really confusing, especially if you're coming into it cold. And I think so much of this is down to awareness, just as much as the social dilemma has set records, because no one knows what's going on underneath the hood of the car.
And that's just scraping the surface, right? I mean, I think for us, admittedly, we say we don't speak tech. This isn't our world. But my goodness, we know the experience of being a human being, and we know what it feels like to see the pain and the suffering or the joy and all the goodness that can come out of this World Wide Web and what it's created for all of us. So just thank you both so much, honestly, for taking the time to help so many other people understand, to help us continue learning and understanding what we can do and how we can help be a part of the solution with you. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all for that important conversation. A big part of engineering a better digital world is making sure that mental health is part of those conversations, as it is deeply interconnected with the state of our digital world. We recently caught up with the creators of Teenager Therapy, a podcast about, quote, 5 stressed, sleep-deprived, yet energetic teens who sit down and talk about the struggles that come with being a teenager. They recently sat down with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and we wanted to give you a window into the work they're doing and the power of their podcast.
Teenager therapy, because we have problems too.
Hi, I'm Gael.
I'm Kayla.
I'm Mark.
I'm Thomas.
I'm Isaac.
And
we're Teenager Therapy.
Listening to Casey Neistat's podcast, which is called Couples Therapy, hence our own name. And I just absolutely loved it. I was binging every episode, like 2 episodes a day. It was just an addiction, really. I loved their podcast. And then one day I was just in a shower and I thought, wait, it could probably be a really good idea if we do this, but for teenagers, because I want to hear what people are going through.
When it comes to serious topics, we don't really sugarcoat it because, we're teenagers and we know that there's like thousands of other people like most likely experiencing the same things as us. So I think it creates like that level of being able to relate to us.
One thing that I wish like parents would understand is that it's totally acceptable for like teenagers to feel sad. Like it's inevitable, like your kids are going to be sad at some point. And instead of, trying to like invalidate their feelings or try to like, wait, how can you be so sad when you have all like this provided and stuff? Like just try to be there for them and, be patient with their feelings, acknowledge them and make sure that, it's totally okay to feel that way.
Exactly. I feel like we live in a different world from our parents. They live in another generation where they have to worry about different things. And right now we're also worrying about different things. There's social media, technology, colleges, and all that stuff.
I've been feeling, just like yesterday, I feel nervous.
For what?
I don't know. I just feel like shaky.
All right, what's on your
Nervous
mind?
because of like...
I don't know what it
Is
is.
it because you're like planning on talking about this? Or?
No, it wasn't. I don't think it's even because of this. I just feel kind of like anxious for no reason.
You go through TikTok or Instagram or any social media platform and you scroll through for a bit, you'll see people with amazing bodies that you wish you had. You'll see people making cute little montages of their friends and that their friend group seems like it's perfect in that moment. And, you see all of this and you start comparing it to your own life and you start seeing like, I don't have that, I don't have this, I wish I had that. And it's that comparison that I think is really driving the mental health wellness of teenagers down.
Before, there were like a lot of lifestyle podcasts, and I feel like even when I listen to some of them, like I would compare my life to those. With our podcast, like you don't need to completely compare your life. You can just relate and just gain like the knowledge of our experiences.
I know for sure I want to keep doing this until we're no longer teenagers and we're officially in our 20s. Maybe we'll pass down the podcast to the new generation. Maybe we'll keep going for a bit more. I don't know. I think it depends. If our audience wants us to keep going for a bit more, we'll do it. And then once they get tired of it, they're like, all right, new generation, and they kick us out, then we'll go do other stuff, I guess.
This is not new. This has happened before.
In every downturn
and disaster in history,
gender equality has been set back
as women have stepped forward.
Women always bear a heavy cost.
More of the frontline care.
More of the pay cuts.
More of the jobs lost.
More of the responsibilities at home.
Keeping them from going back to paid work.
These times are not unprecedented,
but they give us another chance for equality.
If we all choose to step forward as equals.
Care equal.
Hire equal.
Pay equal.
Model equal.
Do equal.
Choose equal.
At home.
At work.
Right now.
For an equal future.
Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. I'm Edward Felsenthal, Editor-in-Chief and CEO of Time, and you're watching a very special edition of Time 100 Talks in partnership with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, focusing on engineering a better world. Our next guest is the inspiring author and activist Rachel Cargle, founder and president of the Loveland Foundation. She'll talk with my colleague Alice Park about the need for safe and accessible therapy spaces for women of color.
Thanks, Edward. I'm Alice Park, senior correspondent for Time, and I'm joined by lecturer and activist Rachel Cargle. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on Time 100 Talks.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So we're going to be discussing a bunch of things today, but I wanted to start with this one. The pandemic has really transformed our lives in so many ways, not the least of which is how much time we spend online now. And we're having this conversation virtually, for example. But you've been online well before COVID-19 and really taking advantage of the digital medium and the digital community. As a lecturer and academic, your classroom isn't always a traditional one, but a digital one. How did your work as a teacher on social media begin?
Well, my work as a teacher basically started with my more intensive work as a student. There was so much that I was learning as I began to explore this intersection of my race and my womanhood, looking at the ways that I, as a Black woman, my placement within the feminist movement. And the more and more I learned after the original march that happened in 2017, the more and more I saw and was more critical about what I was seeing happening within the feminist movement, the more I wanted to share what I was learning. I was trying to see what are the racial histories of the feminist movement? What is the involvement of people of color as leaders, as participants in this movement? And so as I began to watch my own lectures, read my own books, be more intensive in how I was learning, I just started to share out loud what I was learning, and people joined me in that. So that's kind of how it started. I wanted to have a community to learn along with, and they all became students with me as we moved through trying to get a better understanding.
So as you said, as you were sharing your experiences, more people kind of found you and started to follow you. That's one of, I think, the organic ways that digital communities start to grow and can be very powerful. But as we know, it's always a double-edged sword, right?
Absolutely. That's the magic of social media, really, is that we have this opportunity to be in community with people that we never would have been able to meet in real life in previous years. And it can be so pointed and focused on exactly what our personal interests are or our personal insight is. And so in particular, I have been able to find a community of people who are willing to unlearn and reimagine what it is we understand. And I don't think I would have had the type of boldness in exploring this if I wouldn't have known that I was surrounded by other people who were also going through that unlearning journey. And it's really incredible the mental clarity that comes when you realize you're not the only one who's experiencing something, or you're not the only one who's feeling a particular way. And so I think social media has this wildly unique ability to bring people together and to give them validation of what their experiences are, what their realities are, what their lens is, with people from all over the world. So that's absolutely one of the best parts, that you're able to be in community and conversation with others that you would have never had the opportunity to connect with in person in previous times. As far as the negative aspect of it, there's a lot of very hard conversations around what I talk about on my page, looking at people who are reluctant to explore what their role might be in white supremacy, who are reluctant to acknowledge that they might have a privilege in one way or another and are expected to show up to fight for those people who are oppressed under the spaces they exist in. And so oftentimes I get a lot of pushback from people who are either very angered by the conversation and they don't feel like exploring those topics, who feel like my pursuit of justice is an attack against their own personal livelihoods, or who simply sit with these feelings that aren't, that they never had to come up against before, and social media has kind of placed it directly in front of them. And so there's a lot of negative comments, a lot of DMs that I get from people who are angry or frustrated at the way I do my work, and that's just par for the course of being visible to in public spaces.
How can social media become a safe place for people, to share and support and educate, as you've been doing with your community? Are there things that you have found that help to nurture that aspect of it versus the more negative parts?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that as you're approaching this conversation, especially when it comes in a learning space, just to have your tools ready. What sources are you citing? What books can you put people back to? What documentaries can you suggest that they listen to? Because, I'm not the all-in-all expert of the things that I'm teaching. I'm someone who has learned and is simply sharing. And so I always make it a priority to make sure that I tap back and offer who I'm learning from so people can go on and learn themselves. I think one of the hallmarks of a quality teacher, in my opinion, is not just giving information, but teaching people how to learn themselves and teaching people how to think more critically. So I think that a few of the things that absolutely should be considered is recognizing that if you are an expert, you're only an expert because of all the people you've learned from. And it's so wonderful to be able to give people other options of who they could be learning from, because someone else's language might be more clear to them. Someone else's approach might be a little more easy for them to understand or engage with. And so I think as someone who is very visible on social media, I like to have my toolbox of resources for people to pull from outside of me, so they know that my work isn't an opinion piece. It's not just me trying to get people to feel a particular way about how I feel, but there's lots of science I can cite. There's lots of people who have done research that I can point them to, and that our learning starts with the conversation, but it moves much further into gathering knowledge, developing empathy, and taking action.
And as you said, some of the issues that you address, racism, social injustice, white supremacy, are really tough and very complex issues. And, there's a lot of hurt and pain involved as well. And I'm sure you found in your community that the support that's needed is also very important. So how did you see kind of a growing need for support in the mental health area that you wanted to focus on, and how did you recognize that and make sure that was being addressed as well?
Yeah, I to speak for myself, it was very clear that the ongoing constantly coming up against the deep negativity, against just the basic meanness of people, against the dismissal of my realities, the dismissal of these systems that are painful. It was a very real weathering of my mental health in feeling like I was constantly being gaslighted about how me and other people in the Black community were experiencing the world. And so this concept of weathering, which is one that I suggest everyone really go do some research into, because it's not only this grind up against your mental health, but also physically. Black people are having physical reactions to the ongoing microaggressions and macroaggressions that we're experiencing in the world based on our racialized bodies. And so I think that it was very clear to me that if I was to continue in this work, it would absolutely have to include some type of intensive self-care. And I knew that if I was experiencing it, then so many other Black women were, maybe in even more intense ways. I often say that people who come into my comment section and they say, oh my gosh, Rachel, I'm so sorry all these people were saying such mean and degrading things to you. And I say, thank you, I appreciate you having that empathy, but recognize that what you're seeing people say to me online is also what the Black people in your office are hearing in different spaces, are also the things that the Black parents at your school are coming up against. So this isn't a Rachel issue. It's a thing that people need to see reflected in a lot of spaces of society. And so I wanted to be able to show up in the ways that I could along the lines of mental health. And so I started my own foundation called the Loveland Foundation, where we're able to pour into Black women and girls and support them in their mental health journey.
Yeah, and on your homepage for the Loveland Foundation, the motto is, we are becoming the ones we've been waiting for. And I think that's so powerful and holds a lot of meaning. Can you tell us what, in your view, has been missing? You know, how is the foundation aiming to fulfill that need, especially, as you said, among communities of color, and especially women that you are focusing on?
Yeah, well, that's a quote from the brilliant author Alice Walker. And when I first heard the quote, I felt the same way as you. It felt very powerful in considering how we play into how we continue to care for ourselves and survive in this world. And so when I started the Loveland Foundation, it was at first just a birthday fundraiser that I did on my Instagram page about 2 years ago, when I only had probably 10K followers. And so it was just a small fundraiser where I had gone to a therapy session myself that day. And I said, wow, everyone deserves to have this opportunity to get clarity and to be heard. And Black women need this as the foundations of their community. I think there could be a ripple effect from this particular community if I could serve them, knowing that they're often the bedrock of their homes, their churches, their communities, in so many spaces. So I was, when I was trying to figure out how I could have the biggest impact, I figured I could start with Black women and girls. And it became this opportunity for everyone in my community to pour in and invest in the ways that they were showing up for the Black community, and particularly for the Black women and girls that they had been learning so much about through the work and the studying that I was doing. And looking at the phrase, we are the ones we've been waiting for, I think one of the most exciting things about the Loveland Foundation is that it's all this crowdsourced donations. It's a lot of pushing on social media. It's a lot of people doing individual fundraisers, yoga studios having classes where donations are given to the Loveland Foundation, clothing lines donating the proceeds. And I think, considering the term, we are the ones we've been waiting for, it really speaks to the community-minded contributions that come into the Loveland Foundation. It's all of the community, us. We're not waiting for the government to hopefully start caring. We're not waiting for a particular institution to hopefully start caring. We all saw a need, and I was able to come up with a framework, and we all really poured in and became the ones we were waiting for to really take care of Black women and girls in the way that they deserved.
Can you tell us about some of the examples of ways that you've seen that community through the Loveland Foundation do that and help support each other really, and find ways to self-care and provide, as you said, what's missing and what they can't find elsewhere?
Yeah, you know, one of my favorite aspects of the Loveland Foundation is the ways that it's kind of a win-win, where we both are able to get Black women and girls free access to therapy, but also we have partnered with many listservs of Black and queer therapists that will be an option to serve that community. So we're able to both get these Black women and girls the therapy they deserve with a therapist that can really reflect the way that they walk through the world, being a Black woman, being a Black queer person. And then also we're getting these Black therapists who are such a low percentage in the field of therapy. We're able to get them clientele, and to get them paid, we pay them through our voucher program. And so it's been so awesome to meet the therapists who are working with these women and girls, because they are saying, you know, Rachel, I put the Therapy Fund website on my page, and now anyone who comes through me that's a Black woman or girl, I encourage them to get the therapy that they need for free. And so seeing that symbiotic relationship between the girls who need therapy and the Black therapists who are cheering them on, and how they're constantly trying to fuel each other to say, who else can I get to make sure they get the therapy they need, and how can we support our therapists in growing their presence within the therapy field.
That's such a powerful way to, it sounds like the beginnings of something bigger too, right? Do you have plans or a vision for expanding the program or speaking with other groups to include more people and hopefully use this as a model?
We're definitely looking at ways to expand. And one of the biggest things that has been on my heart is being in much more support of the therapists who are part of our network. And one of the ways that we've been doing it, we've been offering them free training sessions in other areas of therapy with institutions who do these trainings, who have come up and said, we want to support the Black therapists who are part of your programming. How can we do that? And they're able to get these trainings that would usually cost a lot of money, and they might not be able to pursue it, and really supporting the therapist and building their craft so that they can really show up for the people that are coming to them, both through our program and outside of our program, any of the clients that they're serving. And as I've been doing this work, it's really become so evident how one of the biggest issues here is that there's not enough Black therapists in the field. And so I'm hoping that our work will start to continue to push to grow that space as well.
And when you began, as you said, you started by sharing your experiences and your insights. Did you ever envision that you would be where you are today and have built the community that you built today? And in addition to that, where do you see this community going 5-10 years from now?
Oh, absolutely not. I was so naive as to what could have been possible. I was kind of just walking through the world like, what can I do and how could I do it? I didn't have any particular plan, but I was willing to try and see what was possible. And I think that willingness to see what was possible is what propelled me into being vulnerable and saying, I have an idea, who's in it to help us see how we can invest in this particular community. And so I am completely blown away by the support that the Loveland Foundation has gained, by the how much the community has grown on my personal platforms, and the ways that learning along with me propels people into taking really meaningful action. And I can only hope that people continue to be critical in how they're experiencing the world, be critical in how they're engaging with each other, and for all of that knowledge to really push people into being more empathetic and actionable towards how we're showing up for each other.
I think that's such an important point for all of us to remember, and it's a great way to really educate, as you found. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and experiences with us. It was such a pleasure having you on Time 100 Talks.
Thank you so much.
Hi everybody, welcome back. Here with me are Maria Ressa, a journalist and the CEO of the news site Rappler, and Renée DiResta, the research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory. Both are experts in and witnesses of how narratives that spread on media platforms are having serious impacts both online and off. Welcome, guys. Renée, very nice to see you again. How's the little one?
Oh, she's great.
Good, excellent, and no doubt you're so busy. Every time
Unsold.
so busy, and Maria, this is the first time that we've met. The two of you have so much responsibility and so much going on in your lives. How are you? Are you? How has this last year been?
At least for me, on June 15th, in the middle of the lockdown in the Philippines, it's the longest in the world and among the strictest. But in the middle of that, I was convicted of cyber libel. It's for a crime that didn't exist when we published the story 8 years ago, a story I didn't write, edit, or supervise. And now I could go to jail for up to 6 years. So having said all of that, yes, I have 8 arrest warrants. I am fighting each case in court, and connected to what you're saying, all of these, the weaponization of the law was actually enabled by the bottom-up attacks on social media that began in 2016, and that's progressed, and we've seen the evolution. So having said that, it's good. Why? Because we just breathe it in like polluted air, and we find the way to fight back, right?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of took the words right out of my mouth, Maria. You are a recognised advocate for the freedom of press, which is absolutely critical and vital to everyone all over the world. And this summer, as you said, a Manila court found you guilty of cyber libel, a charge that your teams argue was meant to silence you from exposing corruption in the Philippines, which you just touched on there. What changes have you seen, Maria, in how the news industry sees and carries out its duty to inform all of us?
We have never been under such intense attack. So by next year, I'll have been a journalist for 35 years, right? I've worked in conflict areas. I've led teams in war zones. And at least in those areas, if the shooting is coming from here, how to protect yourself. In this environment, it's far more insidious, and the tactics are the same globally, and it is enabled by technology. So, in our case in the Philippines, exponential attacks on social media, bottom up, a lie told 1 million times becomes a fact. That began happening in 2016, so 4 years ago. And in 2016, they seeded the narrative, journalist equals criminal. 2017, you have President Duchess himself saying the same thing top down in his State of the Nation address. In 2018, the weaponization of the law happened, 11 cases filed against us. 2019, I had 8 arrest warrants. I was arrested twice in a 5-week period. And 2020, I was convicted in one of the first cases. So journalist equals criminal. The world is turned upside down. I guess my main concern is this. I think journalists around the world have done our jobs. We have held the line. We are telling you the facts, because without facts, you can't have truth. Without this, you can't have trust. Without any of these, democracy as we know it is dead. And I have been saying that for 4 years. I think the last part is, with elections coming up in the United States, without facts, how can you have integrity of elections? With this kind of insidious manipulation that's happening online, how can voters choose, right? How can we know that this is the will of the people? I mean, these are huge issues, right? And I think we need a global collective to try to deal with this.
It's a war of information, right? One of which you've both been warning of for 5 years, more?
It's really, I became a journalist because I knew information is power, and I wanted to fight for justice. We shine the light. That's the mission of journalism. This time shows you more than at any other time that information really is power. And what happened, what triggered it, is news groups lost our gatekeeping powers to technology, and technology abdicated responsibility for protecting the public sphere.
Beautifully said. Worrying, but beautifully said. Renée, sort of switching to you for a second. First, it's really nice to see you again after our first little meeting last month. But your work is also so impressive and so needed as well, as is your remarkable career of all the places where you've worked, all the places that you've been, and all the experience that you've gained from that as well. You don't just dig deep; you dig the deepest, as far as I can tell. And in most cases, into the really unpleasant areas, of which most other people certainly don't have to go to. But on that, thank you for what you do. Thank you to both of you for what you do. But this is really critical work that you're both doing. But Renée, you've informed policymakers, civil society leaders, academic institutions, and so many more. How have online platforms, and by extension some news outlets, enabled the spread of misinformation or propaganda?
Yeah, so as Maria was describing, this bottom-up activism, originally social platforms were a way for people to connect with each other. And there was an explosion in extraordinary social movements that came about as a result of that in the early days, right? And so we don't want to imply that that act of connecting people or that act of democratizing access, the ability to create content, the ability to disseminate it, the ability to bypass gatekeepers, candidly, to make your voice heard, particularly if you were a member of a community that didn't have access to press. This was a global phenomenon that happened on social platforms that they really enabled. But the downside of that, the unintended consequence, is when you connect everybody and when you make it possible for information to spread instantaneously, not everybody who is endowed with that power uses it responsibly. And so what you see is fake people begin to participate in the conversation. Fake media properties begin to spring up. Because as Maria mentioned, this is a tool of power. And if you can control the narrative and if you can dominate the share of voice, then you can achieve real world objectives. For a while, people talked about the internet or social platforms as this thing that happened over there. Yeah, there were conspiracy theories, but that was just on the internet. Yes, there was some, kind of wild claims and harassment, hate speech, et cetera, but that was just on the internet. Then we began to realize the extent to which what was happening online and offline, the tools of influence, the democratization of the ability to influence, and candidly, the democratization of propaganda meant that ordinary people could have a profound impact in shaping the direction of leadership, the direction of policy, and the direction that their country was going.
I think we all agree media is a huge responsibility and it is a huge power and it's a privilege. But the moment that it gets taken out of responsible hands, then you have sort of uncharted territory, chaos, one might describe it as.
I think that's accurate. And I think a lot of where we are today is thinking about, we have a brand new information environment. It's only about, 10 years old or so, the social web. And whereas whenever there's a new technological tool for the dissemination of information or propaganda, there was kind of like a period of social upheaval while the world, while societies kind of began to understand how they could use it, what it was for, and where regulators began to think about how they would address it. And I think that we're in that pivotal period right now, trying to understand how to take the good and minimize the chaos, if you will, and achieve an environment where people do have that freedom of expression, that ability to connect without some of the unintended downstream harms that we've seen manifest as a result.
And what is the real effect of misinformation? What is it actually doing to us? To either of you. Maria, perhaps you go first.
Well, can I quickly, I think Renee is nicer than I am in this one, right? And I will say this because I'm living through it. I really am, and I can compare it over 35 years. So what you call chaos, look, when news organizations were the gatekeepers, we had standards and ethics, values. We were legally liable, right? So we protected the facts. But what happened when technology took over is that they took the platforms and they didn't realize it, as Renée said, unintended consequences. But what they did is something journalists have never done, which is to willfully manipulate people, to use neuroscience to build in, it's called optimizing growth and engagement. And I really hate the word engagement now, the way tech uses it, but they build it in. So what they do is they figure out the way we think, and then really just gleefully figure out that, okay, well, these are the worst parts of human nature. Let's not just influence, let's take their data. So on every social media platform, we put in our data. It is atomized. Machine learning takes it and builds a model of each of us. It knows us more intimately than we know ourselves. And then that model is pulled up by artificial intelligence into this pool where, let's just say, a company or a country has a message, and the artificial intelligence will give the most vulnerable moment you have to a message, and to the highest bidder, sell it, and you are nudged. It's a feedback loop. When you're nudged, you can take the nudge or you cannot. But either way, whatever action you take goes right back into the machine. I'm sorry, so geeky about it. And I know Renée knows as much about this because this has been years long conversations we've had. I think the reality now is that the world is at a precipice. I am paying the price for Silicon Valley's decisions, and there has to be accountability. We are fighting impunity in the Philippines, not just of our government that is killing people, the drug war. Our human rights groups say it's at least 27,000 people killed since last December. But we're also challenging the impunity of the platforms. Facebook in particular, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. And you could say that Rodrigo Duterte and Mark Zuckerberg are on the same page as far as the threats to us are concerned.
Okay, so in your experience and with all your connections, who are the leaders in preventing the spread of misinformation? Which people, which organizations need a light shone on them right now?
This is what's happening. Renee said it. It's creative destruction. I think we all have to accept that the world as we knew it is dead. And, in the same way, this year is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima, Nagasaki. What happened? The entire world came together, and we came up with Bretton Woods, with NATO, with the UN Declaration of Human Rights. This is another one of those pivotal moments. Data is not oil, it is plutonium. And I'm paraphrasing Jim Balsillie, who is the CEO of the company that did BlackBerry. He chose a business model that wasn't extractive of our behavior, right? So if it's plutonium and an atom bomb went off, Prince Harry, what would you do, right? This is, I guess, I'm saying we all have a stake in this. Every American going into elections, you can't just think voting is enough. You're going to have to sit and ask yourself the same question I asked myself, which is, what will you sacrifice for the truth? What will you sacrifice for the facts? And in our case, we're really called on to sacrifice a lot.
And Renee, what is the way that these platforms, but what I'm hearing you say is the way that these platforms have almost hijacked media, news, privilege, power, all of that. What is that doing to news organizations? Is there? I mean, there's obviously a huge commercial incentive here based on almost industrializing news.
Well, I mean, in the States, we've seen an extraordinary fragmentation of media. We see, it's interesting. All major media properties have presences on social media as well, where they kind of participate in that battle for attention. You see headlines that are much more sensational, the actual substance of the article. A lot of the time that's because they're competing. Nobody is going, it's not like you pick up the newspaper, you're going to read it in its, newspaper form in its entirety. Or even, people used to go to NewYorkTimes.com, Fox.com, CNN.com. Now people see what is curated for them. I think actually it's the combination of how the information is delivered to us in particular. Maria refers to some of the targeting, advertising targeting, incentives, and engagement. A lot of the ways that we see information is no longer a holistic view of the world by looking at the entirety of all of the coverage of a particular topic, even within one publication. We don't have that perspective. What we see are the things that are curated for us, which means that the feed, which is algorithmically ranking hierarchically what we are most likely to be receptive to or want to pay attention to. Based on, again, each of the platforms being roughly in competition with each other for our time and our attention. So that dynamic is very real. It is informed by the business model. I think where we are today with news in particular, though, as people, when there is a sense of crisis, which is since March, in the United States, there's been a constant sense of crisis. It's only increasing as we had these last 3 weeks into the election. People gather on social platforms, and they're there because they want to talk to their communities while consuming the news. So this is, this kind of marriage of entertainment, social, and information, all being in the same place. And so the net effect of that is that they are seeing what is shared by their friends in their communities. So occasionally that means, in a lot of cases, you'll have a very kind of narrow, bubbly type view of what's happening in the world. But more than that, there's a constant desire for immediacy, for, knowing the truth instantaneously. And that's not how reputable news works. And so there's this demand for every time I refresh my phone, there has to be some new information. I have to learn something new. During COVID, it was, what are the treatments? What are the cures? What's going to happen to my family? Now, as we head into the election, it's, what is the latest crazy story in the campaign? People expect reputable information instantaneously. And that is, those two things are in tension. And I don't think that we have an effective way to resolve that in our curation or amplification structures at this point.
And Maria, that must, as a journalist, that must be incredibly hard, because there's this competition that has now been created, where you have to get something online first, and if you don't, then you lose out by however many millions of clicks, and then commercially you lose out as well. But then surely the pressure that's coming from above to get that story online as quickly as possible, all of a sudden the importance of facts is sort of pushed to the side. So invariably there's this struggle, this whatever you want to call it, to try and to get the story first. And even if there isn't a story, 24-hour news cycle, you've got to fill the space. So you've got to create the news.
But Harry, I would go one step further than that. I think that was the case in 2014, in 2015, when we were getting the rush to digitalization, when news was moving online. Rappler is a startup. We began it online in 2012, and we embraced Facebook. I'm just going to rephrase something Renee said, which is, think about it. This is the way I'm living through it, right? Meaning has been atomized. So everything a journalist does is torn apart into bits and pieces. And then it is the algorithm of delivery platforms, of social media, that decides the context for the sentences you write. So we're no longer in charge of context or meaning, right? And that is the problem, because when you have a democracy and an algorithm that is meant to exploit your weaknesses to keep you on the platform, when that is what determines the context of the messages you live, the messages that give meaning to your world, you're really reduced to meaninglessness. And then aside from that, the designs of the platforms themselves actually encourage us against them, right? In the Philippines, we saw ourselves, like, if you're pro-Duterte, and you can use this for pro-Trump or anti-Trump. In 2016, in order to grow the social media platforms, they recommend friends of friends. Every single social media platform uses that. And if you do that, in 2016, the pro-Duterte people grew and they moved further right. The anti-Duterte people grew their platforms and they moved further left. And it went and it went. And what's being torn apart here is the public sphere. That's why we have no shared facts. So what does that mean? No meaning, no context, or the context that is provided by an algorithm that is opaque at best. We have no idea how it's manipulating us. And then I think
the context stripped away, right? The context stripped. Because of social media, I don't know how many characters you're allowed on most of these things, but of course it's going to anger people. Of course it's going to cause divisiveness, because what should be a story with context about this long gets shrunk down into one sentence or three sentences, and it enrages people because they're making opinions or decisions based on that instant hit, as opposed to what the younger generation seem to be doing, which is, I've seen something somewhere, I'm going to fact check that, I'm going to go over here, okay, and I'm going to go to somewhere else. So if you have 2 or 3 different areas to be able to compare it with, then great. But if you're just on one social media platform and you are unaware of your habits being learnt by the device, you're creating your own echo chamber, of which feels great, and you're creating your own reality. And therefore, once again, it is impossible to be able to have an argument or a discussion with somebody else, because you are adamant that you are right because you've seen it on all of your news feeds, but those news feeds have been created for you.
So it feeds into your cognitive bias. But I'll say one last thing on this, which is that the platforms actually spread lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than really boring facts. Journalists spend lifetimes learning how to tell stories so that you care, but we don't stand a chance in these delivery platforms. So I get emotional again, so this is the problem. Anger and hate is part of it. The manipulation of our emotions is part of it. And what you talked about is a thinking slow process. Journalism is a thinking slow process that is trying to be distributed on a thinking fast platform. We are going to lose, which is why we have to demand enlightened self-interest from Silicon Valley. Renée, go for it.
Well, look, it's a group effort, and I and everybody else watching this can't thank you guys enough for all of the work that you continue to do, the research, the endless content that you have to go through to be able to find the truth or to be able to stop more of this from happening. But there's been quite a heavy subject for people to take on. So, in short, to end with, some optimism, some hope. These are global platforms that have an ability or have connected people all around the world. So presumably handled the right way or managed the right way, and algorithms were built by humans. So this idea that it can't be changed or it's now completely out of control, one would hope is actually false. Something can be done about this, and then we have a world that is connected for all the right reasons. So starting with you, Renée, and then moving on to Maria. What is that last piece of optimism and hope that you would leave everybody watching this now?
I think that really it's actually the civil society and researchers and government and the cooperation that we've built over the last few years leading into 2020 in particular, but since 2016. I think that, Maria is absolutely right. There is not accountability in the way that we need it to be. It's just not there yet. In the U.S. in particular, I know this is the optimism part, so I don't want to be too negative, but even the very idea of a fact check is partisan now. It is perceived as censorship by vast swaths of the population. If somebody tells you what you've said is wrong, that is censoring your opinion, right? And that is where we are. I think that one of the things that we try to do at Stanford is we do try to work with the platforms so that we can make constructive suggestions so that at least in the near term, we have a little bit more in the way of positive outcomes, particularly with these, pick whatever the next crisis is. I think on the optimism front, though, we are also seeing so much awareness from the public, which is demanding accountability, but more than that, which is recognizing that they also have some agency, not a ton, not as much as they need, but enough, I think, at this point where we're starting to see media literacy and efforts, as you mentioned, from the younger generation, where they are doing that lateral searching, really making an effort to try to find out what's true by looking at, in a kind of plethora of places on the internet. And I think that as we continue to develop those programs and, the younger generation kind of continues to take over, we're headed in the right direction.
On my end, Harry, Rappler started in 2012, and we had 3 pillars: technology, journalism, community. And now I can't give up because we're going to fight. And that is where the global battle should begin. Tech, demand accountability, demand regulations, demand enlightened self-interest. The second is journalism. We keep doing our jobs. Facts are incredibly important. And for the international community, help news groups survive this time period, right? And that's part of the initiative we have with BBC Media Action and Luminate to try to get a fund of $1 billion annually to help independent media survive. And then the third, which is what Renée said, community. Civil society has to come together, and we have to feed them facts. These are all connected. This is the reason why I liked joining the real Facebook Oversight Board, because there are very strong civil rights activists there, very strong academics and journalists. Our battle is combined. We are the tripods of democracy.
I mean, beautifully said by both of you. Thank you to both of you for giving up your time to speak to me and to speak to us. As I said before, the work you're doing is incredible, and so many people don't know what you do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you. Good luck with everything. Keep smiling, especially you, Maria. I love the energy. And yeah, look after yourselves, and no doubt we'll speak soon.
Thank you all for that important conversation. We'll be hearing from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in just a few moments. But first, we spoke with Naj Austin, the founder of Ethel's Club, the first private social and wellness club specifically designed to support and celebrate people of color. Here's a look at what inspired her to create these spaces and her vision for the future of social media.
As a Black woman speaking from my own personal experience, I know what it's like to have people harass you online. I know what it's like to have people call you racist names online, to treat you with such a level of disrespect that you don't want to be on the internet. But I don't think I ever thought there could be an alternative. I knew that people of color, Black people, needed space to be unburdened. I knew that they needed space to feel seen and heard. I started to have this thought around, what if there could be a new social platform that everyone who felt left out could all be gathered in one place, where it was built off of kindness, off of intentional connection, off of this idea that the rest of the internet was not built with you in mind, but this platform is. And so that platform is Somewhere Good, which is an online social platform designed to connect people of color to the things that they care about. The earliest experience I had with a really intentional community was at my grandmother's house. It was such a place of warmth and positive energy, and she also had very strict rules as to how you could act in her house. It was always a house of kindness and respect, and you don't talk to people that way. I think this feeling of having a support system that you could kind of lean on in that way was important to me, and I don't think I realized that until much later in my life. One of the biggest things I found with a lot of the social platforms that exist is that there's not a lot of moderation. You are brought into a big room and you're given a soapbox and you're able to yell and say whatever you want from that soapbox. And so one of the things we're doing with Somewhere Good is creating small rooms where people are invited in. It should feel like a dinner party. We find the best communities that are aligned with your interests and your identity. And then we take you somewhere good by creating a timeline and news feed that's curated from those select communities that you've decided to join. Dreaming up online worlds is not for the faint of heart. It often feels like there's a lot of no. How Black people and people of color can exist safely online is definitely not something that most founders who are creating spaces online think about, because they tend to be white, they tend to be predominantly male, they tend to be predominantly heterosexual. So you're talking about a very specific group that is building these spaces for everyone. And a lot of what Somewhere Good is taking all of that and trying to reimagine what it could be if the internet was built by people who come from different intersectional identities and built something where we all felt reflected and sort of safe in that manner.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
It's an ugly, nasty word, and you are going to hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not going to let that word hurt you.
You got your ID? Guess I stopped you.
Okay. Now, when you get pulled over...
I'm a good driver. Okay?
Baby,
don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay.
You are not pretty for a Black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
Welcome back to TIME100 Talks. Before we wrap up today's show, I'd like to thank all of today's guests. We'd also like to thank P&G for making today's important conversations possible. And I'd especially like to thank the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for putting together such a powerful and thoughtful TIME100 Talks program. Just to wrap it up, you both spoke to many leaders, advocates, change makers in the digital space today, and in an ongoing way, I know, people who are actively doing the work to create safe, healthy, trustworthy online communities. And I know they've provided for you and through the program and in general just a wealth of knowledge and insights on solutions and next steps. So I just wanted to ask you in closing, what do you hope everyone comes away with from today's program, and what do you see as next steps?
Ladies first.
That's very kind. I hope that everyone comes away with one action item that they realize they can do in their own home, in their own life, in their own interactions online, that they know and can now see will make a positive effect on how they're interacting with themselves and with others. And I think from all the knowledge that we were able to hear today, everyone in their own different way, I would imagine, comes away with something they say, I can do that today. I can do that today, and that will help make a difference, because it doesn't have to be so big. I think a lot of the impact we can see is in all of the small things.
I hope people come away with a sense of optimism that there are a huge number of experts that really know their stuff, that have done the research, that have got the statistics, that prove, firstly, the problem, but also have part of the solution. And I think, just touching on what Meghan was saying there, there's so much that we can do to help ourselves, but there's so much more that we can do, that our act, our decisions, how it impacts everybody else as well, both online and off. And I think that power of retaining of taking back control, each and every one of us taking back control, so we are not controlled by this platform, that we are not controlled by this device. And there are certain things that we and you can do that will make a huge impact in your own life. And I think that will be felt across the world, because over half the world is connected in this sense.
Just want to thank you both again. Really a pleasure having you be part of Time 100 Talks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks to all of the guests who've joined you and joined us for this program. We'll be back this Thursday with another great Time 100 Talks program. Hope to see you all then.